Hi, I'm Amanda Marcotte. I'm a senior politics writer for Salon.com. Paneling for the abortion panel today, and my guests today, thank you, are Kimberly Mutcherson. She's a law professor from Rutgers. Lizbeth Rodriguez, who is the community coordinator for the Philadelphia Women's Health Clinic, and David Cohen, who is a law professor for Drexel University. So, yeah. I want to start with Lizbeth because I think there's a lot of discussion about abortion politically, about abortion legally, but I think there's not a ton of discussion still about what abortion is looking like after the Dobbs decision for the people that are actually trying to get abortions. So I'd invite you to say, like, what has happened for your patients here in Philadelphia and the other clinics you work for since Dobbs? How are they feeling about things?
Absolutely. So in Pennsylvania, abortion is legal. However, legality has never meant accessibility for folks. So our abortion providers like us have always had to extend themselves. Before Roe v. Wade, we've been providing abortion services since 1972. That's pre-Roe v. Wade. And a lot of the same barriers that we have seen post-Dobbs decision were a lot of the same ones we've seen in the past 50 years. So for a lot of marginalized communities, these barriers, bad laws, and restrictions on providers have been affecting us for the past 50 years. So I think we were positioned in very well in our communities. Our communities trust us, they know us, and so we were positioned very well to kind of be able to roll with the punches that post-Dobbs decision. You know, a lot of our patients still struggle with accessing care due to financial barriers and also, you know, traveling costs. Abortion providers are not just, you know, we're having to extend ourselves and becoming travel agents. We're having to become the very abortion funders. You know, we're not just having to, you know, sit in our clinics and see our patients. We're having to really step outside of our provider role and think about ways that we can support our patients and our communities through really some hard times and a lot of misinformation. A lot of the laws we've seen, whether they pass or not, are meant to just confuse our patients. Whenever we hear a 6-week ban in Pennsylvania, we know it's not going to pass. However, that does initiate a lot of confusion for our patients. We have an advocacy center dedicated for answering questions, scheduling appointments, breaking barriers, and so that specific our advocacy center really gets clogged up with a lot of folks calling in about whether or not their appointment's going to be there tomorrow. You know, our patients are afraid of criminalization, and so you know, it's a lot on abortion providers and our patients.
Yeah, you answered what my follow-up question was going to be, was if people are thinking that they don't have a right or that they're going to go to prison, even here in Pennsylvania. So it's affecting people everywhere, no matter what. And I want to kick it to you, David, after that, because you know, obviously Pennsylvania has been controlled by Republicans for a long time, and that's changing. And I think one of the sort of undercovered stories post-Dobbs is things have, and correct me if I'm wrong, they've gotten a little better here, weirdly, as a reaction to that. So please tell everybody here, like, what's happened in Pennsylvania since Dobbs.
So here in Pennsylvania, and actually there's a bunch of states where abortion remains legal where actually things have gotten better. We've seen states around the country where abortion remains legal, where pro-choice legislators and governors have started doing what we've wanted them to do for decades, which is get rid of restrictions that have remained on the books, even in liberal states. Fund abortion. We've seen governors in states like New York, California, Oregon, Maryland spend millions, even tens of millions of dollars to support abortion provision and abortion patients. And we've been asking that for decades. We've seen ballot initiatives win in states. Here in Pennsylvania, we had a big victory before the Pennsylvania Supreme Court in January. I was one of the lawyers on that case representing the women's centers and the other clinics here in Pennsylvania, where we challenged the state's ban on Medicaid funding. Pennsylvania is one of 33 states that doesn't allow Medicaid to cover abortion. And we challenged that as violating the state constitution. And we won 3-2. We didn't get the ultimate victory yet. We're still getting down that path. But we got a really great ruling from the Pennsylvania Supreme Court saying that when the state funds comprehensive reproductive health care for men through Medicaid, but not all reproductive health care for women through Medicaid, that is a violation of this, that can be and is likely, we have to finish that, get just over that last hurdle, likely a violation of the State Equal Rights Amendment. And going back to what one of the panelists talked about earlier today, the reason we won that case is because in 2015, the voters of Pennsylvania voted for 3 pro-choice Democrats on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And what you'll note about 2015, it's an odd year. It is not a presidential year. It's not even a congressional year. But the voters came out in this off-year election and voted for people who they knew were going to make a difference on our court. And we now have a 5-2 Democratic-controlled court, which for 40, 50 years, that would have been inconceivable. But because people have paid attention to these elections in Pennsylvania, it has made a difference.
Kimberly, the Alabama State Supreme Court, on the flip side of this, ruled that IVF is functionally like illegal in their state. It's complicated, but and I think it surprised a lot of Americans because they didn't realize that anti-abortion laws affected things like IVF, and that's something I think only those of us that are kind of in the weeds understood. So I guess now that people understand kind of why that might be, I want to ask you, what are some of the other ways that Dobbs is going to have implications for other kinds of reproductive health care that women can access?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I will say about the Alabama case is, as someone who has read hundreds and hundreds of court opinions, one of the concurring opinions by the Chief Justice in that case has more citations to the Bible than I have ever seen in any court opinion I've ever read. So that tells you something about where all of this is coming from. But one thing to really keep in mind as we think about, embryos as children, right? An embryo is no different than 5 weeks gestation is no different than a 5-year-old. This movement has never been just about abortion. It was never just about abortion. It is fundamentally about personhood and creating personhood for entities that most of us wouldn't think of as people, right? Even if you think that there is value to them, even if you think that there are ways in which they should be protected, that they're not the same as people. But that is the direction in which these folks are moving us. And the implications of that for fertility are very clear, right? So if you have embryos and they are frozen, and we have anywhere from 500,000 to over 1 million, depending upon who you talk to, frozen embryos in this country. Well, if those are no different than children, then people who aren't going to use them are abandoning children. So we should probably give them to other people who will bring them to fruition, right? You certainly can't destroy them. You certainly can't let them be used for research, right? So what's going to happen to all those embryos? But the other thing that personhood brings us to is serious questions about criminalizing the behavior of pregnant women. And I want to be very, very clear that this is not new, that this is something that has been happening, particularly in a number of southern states, but really across the country for decades. And it is arresting women for miscarriages because you think that they tried to self-abort. It is arresting women for behavior during their pregnancy, whether it is illicit drug use or sometimes not illicit drug use. And who do you think gets swept up in that? It's a lot of women who look like me, right? A lot of black and brown women, a lot of low-income women. And the idea that the way that you deal with someone who has substance use disorder and who is pregnant is by putting them in prison, right, says a lot about what you actually think about fetuses and about being pro-life. So the spectrum here of what happens when people go after abortion is so much broader than just abortion. And it's unfortunate that it took these kinds of cases for people to start to see that, because again, this has been a part of our landscape for decades, but at least now people are talking about it more.
And I want to follow up because Molly Jong-Fast said something on the last panel about doctors being afraid to do first trimester health care in red states. Can you explain kind of the legal and medical reasons why that might be?
So, I mean, I think that it's more complicated than what she put on the table. So I'll say a couple of things about that. One is that in a lot of jurisdictions now, what we're seeing is people who would be providing that health care leaving, right? They don't want to stay in states where providing abortion care, which is a standard part of providing care, right? Because you never know when someone's going to need a termination, whether it's an ectopic pregnancy, right? All sorts of things could happen. So you can't get access to care simply because there are no doctors anymore. And we have tons of maternity deserts in this country, and we're getting more and more of them. So imagine that you're pregnant and the closest place for your prenatal appointment is 400 miles away. God forbid something go wrong during that pregnancy. So that's one thing. The second thing is a lot of the statutes that are covering abortion care are written, some people would say deliberately. I would say it's not necessarily deliberate. It's the idea that a bunch of people who have absolutely no background in healthcare are writing rules about how healthcare gets provided. And so even the statutes that have exceptions, the exceptions aren't really clear, right? So when is it exactly that you can perform an abortion? Does it have to be that this is a person who is on the brink of death? Can you perform an abortion because you're trying to preserve someone's fertility, right? So it's not that this person's going to die, but that this is not a pregnancy that is going to go to term, and this is a person who would like to be able to get pregnant again. Very questionable if you can perform an abortion in those cases, even in states that have an exception. So a lot of what we are seeing isn't necessarily that people aren't there, but if they are there, they can provide prenatal care, but the question becomes, when there is something that goes wrong in this pregnancy, at what point can I intervene in that? And the last thing that I'll also say about that is that, and Philadelphia is a place where we've seen amazing innovation in what are called sort of perinatal care, right? The idea that you can actually do surgery, which is amazing. You can do surgery on a fetus in utero and then continue that pregnancy. Well, what if you want to do that to protect a fetus and then the person ends up miscarrying? Have you then performed an abortion? Did you not have the right intent? Are you still going to get in trouble for that? So the issues here are so much broader than just access to abortion.
And I think that's something that's really become an interesting issue. A lot of people are surprised, Lizbeth, about how many stories have come out about women who wanted to have their babies, but ended up having to get what I think they may not have even realized was an abortion until it was banned. As somebody who's in the care world, can you tell us a little bit more about some of those black and white, or those areas that are more gray and not black and white, like an abortion by choice or an abortion for medical reasons? Like, what do you see in practice? Is there like gray areas in there that women are concerned about?
Yes. However, I feel like the stigma around abortion really hasn't allowed folks to, grieve either the loss of their pregnancy, whether it's a miscarriage, a fetal anomaly, a fetal demise. And so a lot of that is kept quiet within their own families. And a lot of that is going unsaid in the election. Independent abortion providers like us care for those folks as well. And so the line is definitely very blurred. However, a lot of the times folks don't feel that that they can truly come out and say, hey, I had miscarriage management at the abortion clinic. And so those conversations are really happening. And I think that's definitely that that comes with stigmatizing abortion even further. And the way we can continue to destigmatize abortion is by speaking about it and not hiding around the word abortion, saying the word abortion. If you are pro-choice, you are pro-abortion. And talking about your abortion story, whether it was an elective abortion or you're having to manage a miscarriage or a fetal anomaly or a fetal demise. And so by storytelling, it really has shined a light in this topic and this population of people who are going unheard due to the stigma around abortion.
Can I say one more thing about what counts as an abortion? Because again, I do abortion and assisted reproduction. Sometimes when you're using assisted reproduction, you become what I call too pregnant, right? You wanted to be pregnant with 2, but you ended up pregnant with 4, and carrying 4 to term is very dangerous for you, and it's very dangerous for the fetuses. And so what your doctor says to you is, I can do a procedure, they will never call it an abortion. I can do a procedure where we can selectively reduce 2 of those embryos, 2 of those fetuses, and you will be pregnant with twins instead of with quadruplets. And I'm not going to call it an abortion. It never gets regulated as an abortion. And yet, if you're talking about the termination of life, right, that is definitely what's going on in those cases. So there are all of these ways in which we sort of talk about abortion as a sort of static thing that everybody understands. The world is so much more complicated than that.
I can say personally, I have friends who have stopped saying I lost the baby and are saying the A word now. I had an abortion because they are realizing, I think, the politics of this. David, we have a decision coming up from the Supreme Court soon on mifepristone, which is one of the 2 drugs used in medication abortions. I was surprised during oral arguments that Amy Coney Barrett seemed to be a little skeptical of banning this drug. And I want to ask your opinion of why you think she felt that way and whether the fact that maybe she's one of the only 2 people on the court who's given birth had something to do with it.
Yeah, she's proving quite complicated in some ways. I mean, she still voted to overturn Roe v. Wade, but subsequent reporting showed she was a little hesitant about that. But, she did it, so that doesn't really matter, I guess. But in this case about mifepristone, which, like Amanda said, it's one of 2 drugs taken for a medication abortion, the other one misoprostol. This is really the big anti-abortion legal attempt after Roe v. Wade was overturned to even further restrict abortion. And it looks like it's going to be a big swing and a miss. Now, can't say for sure, but it looks like it's going to fail. And it looks like it's going to fail because these were doctors who brought this claim who are trying to say that because they might see a patient somewhere down the line who took this drug and had a complication, even though the complications are minimal, that this drug shouldn't have been approved in 2000, because these doctors might someday see a patient who takes this drug. It's really convoluted. It's really a terrible theory of getting into court. And I think she and Brett Kavanaugh, maybe Chief Justice Roberts, maybe 1 or 2 others, are really concerned about that this just is a step too far about who's allowed to come into court. It's almost appealing to their conservative notion that people shouldn't be able to come to court to address wrongs, right? Which is sort of a big thing conservative judges cared a lot about in the 50s and 60s, keeping litigants out of court. And I think this is appealing to her and Kavanaugh and Roberts in that way. And in particular, she was most concerned. She said, because these doctors have a religious conscience exemption from caring for abortion patients because of various things that have been put in place over the decades to protect people who are against abortion, who provide medical care, that they actually will never be in this position. Because if they really don't want to treat a patient who took abortion pills, they are actually protected by federal law and maybe state law from doing so. And that's a controversial interpretation, but according to Amy Coney Barrett, Brett Kavanaugh, that's their interpretation. And so if they don't ever have to deal with these patients, then how can they be in court claiming this drug is a problem? So I think it was sort of appealing to that sort of religious exemption notion of hers and the conservative, let's keep litigants out of court. So the combination of the 2 I think might save this case for our side. For now, until they get better plaintiffs down the line. But at least, look, hey, any win here is a win because it keeps these drugs available. And right now, 63% of abortions are through medication abortion. And it's going up every year. So, if 2 years down the line they're successful, which hopefully they're not, and we win now, that's still 2 more years where a lot of people are getting the care that is most common.
I want to talk a little before we're done about people from red states coming to places where it's still legal. So first, Lizbeth, I want to ask you, are you seeing patients that are needing to travel from red states to clinics in this area for abortions yet?
Yes, absolutely. And we, as I mentioned, we're having to become travel agents, and abortion funds for our patients. However, Pennsylvania is still very restricted. We have the Pennsylvania Abortion Control Act with mandatory waiting periods, restrictions on young folks, and a number of restrictions on providers that truly make it difficult for folks in red states to come and seek care here. Luckily for us, in this area, we do have our Cherry Hill Women's Centers just right over the bridge, where folks are accessing more of that care.
And Kimberly, I want to end with you by asking a little bit more about that, because New Jersey has some of the most liberal abortion laws in the country, correct? So are they prepared to be an abortion safe haven?
So first of all, I just want to say there are lots of jokes about New Jersey. But if you are a person who cares about reproductive health care and abortion in particular, New Jersey is at the top of the list. So Jersey, we have a great Reproductive Freedom Act that was passed even before Dobbs came down. We do not have the kinds of restrictions that a lot of states have, including gestational limits. You can use Medicaid to pay for abortion in New Jersey, so low-income women have access to abortion in ways that are not true in a lot of other states. We have a lot of clinics, but those clinics are also, being both a sanctuary state and a surge state, it means that those clinics have a lot of people who are coming. I gave a ride to a woman who came from Texas to New Jersey for her first trimester abortion, which is absolutely ludicrous. So a lot of states that are surge states and that are sanctuary states and that are bordering really tough states are seeing a lot more patients, and New Jersey is putting more money to allow people to get care there. But we're also going to see Florida is going to be really hard, because that's a place where a lot of people were going in the South, and not being able to go to Florida is going to push a lot more people up to where we are.
Can I just add one thing? So part of what's made, I don't know if people have seen, the numbers of abortions in this country have actually gone up since Dobbs. And part of that is because there has been a huge influx in donations to abortion funds, practical support networks, and volunteers who are doing the things that Kim just talked about in terms of driving patients. Those are going down. People, that happened for like a year after Dobbs, and rage donations, as they're called, are drying up. And so we have not seen the dire effects everywhere. Some places have been dire effects, but everywhere post-Dobbs that I think a lot of us expected. But if these rage donations dry up completely and we don't see a rebound, we could start seeing even more drastic effects post-Dobbs. So, one of the takeaways here is that everyone who donated to abortion funds in 2022 in July after the Supreme Court decision, you need to get them to become regular donors. And volunteering and supporting, because that was not just the summer of 2022 that we needed the help. That is going to be ongoing. So that's a big story right now.
And with the defunding of a lot of family planning clinics, I think the prevention side is not doing great either. So I think we should leave it there, but thank you guys so much for coming. This was great.